Welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Shaun and Jim.
Hello and welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. I'm Jim Galante. He is Sean Gold. Sean, how are we doing this week?
Doing just fine, Jim. Excited for another week of talking sports with you.
And we do have some great topics this week. Thank you, Bill Belichick, for always giving us something to talk about. We have a couple other topics also. And one topic, you and I, we've already established this, Sean. You and I love the NFL draft. We like to talk about it ahead of time, analyze it when it's going on, review it after it's done. It's now been done for a couple weeks. And I think one of the most, I don't want to call them polarizing figures because I think overall admired figures is Howie Roseman, general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles. And during this draft, he will always make moves in the draft. And he made a move to move up one spot to get a draft pick. And that's what made this interesting was an interview then with Baltimore Ravens general manager Eric DeCosta, and he talked about kind of the two different ways, two different theories on how to go about dealing with the draft, Sean.
Yeah, for people who didn't see the interview, right? Howie Roseman, as you mentioned, a big guy on I'm going to trade to get my guy. I'm going to kind of finesse the draft. Eric DeCosta with the Ravens going from more of the approach of, hey, this is a crapshoot, and we don't know who's going to be a stud, who's not going to be. So I want to get as many players as I can, and I'm not going to sacrifice future draft capital to jump up and get somebody because I think that guy I would jump up for, one, might still be available come my pick, and two, has an equal shot of being a bust as anybody else in the draft and as equal of a shot at being a star as anyone else in the draft. So there's two very different sides to it. I would say, in general, I'm more on Eric DeCosta's side of this. I do think scouting is so hard, and we've talked about quarterback evaluations in prior weeks. Nobody really knows which quarterback is going to be good, and I always like that reference you brought up of the Saquon Barkley draft when we got Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield in there. You could have spun the wheel on any of those four quarterbacks and had about an equal shot of getting that superstar quarterback. We didn't know Josh Allen would end up being the Josh Allen he is today. We didn't know Josh Rosen was going to be a bust in the NFL. So I do think that the logic of, hey, let me get more picks, let me not sacrifice future draft capital is probably the smarter way for 31 NFL franchises. Now, Howie Roseman is just, as we would say, built different. He somehow has mastered the NFL draft, and the way that he evaluates talent, it's different than all the other franchises because he just does not miss on his draft picks. So for everyone else, I would say don't go and trade up. Don't go take that risk. But for Howie Roseman, if he likes a prospect, I'll give anything to get that prospect because just time and time again, he has proven that every trade up that he's done, I would have to fact check myself on this, but everyone that I can remember at least has been a massive success. And I do not blame him at all for sacrificing some future capital to get a guy. And I would also like to say, he also does a great job of trading away players that the Eagles don't necessarily need anymore for draft capital. So it's not like the Eagles are spread thin on the draft picks that they have. They accumulate picks through trading away players that no longer fit the roster that he's looking to build. And then he uses those picks to go get the new guys that he wants. So I think he does it in a very genius way that a lot of NFL franchises are not able to replicate. So for the majority of the NFL, I side with the Ravens there and DeCosta on, hey, keep your picks, get as many players as you can, and eventually somebody's going to hit, and you're going to have multiple people that hit if you get enough of those draft picks. But for Howie Roseman and the Eagles, keep doing what you're doing because it is working for sure.
Sean, I believe the last thing you said about Howie Roseman is the most important thing, which is I think he agrees with Eric DeCosta more than the interview would lead you to believe because he does accumulate draft picks. In fact, if you go look at the number between this year and next year, or this past, draft and next year's draft, He probably has as many or more draft picks than anybody else in the draft. He then uses them to get what he needs. So I'm with you in that. I think what DaCosta is saying, there's something to it.
Mhm.
Okay, the randomness to it, that there's a lot of talent out there, and it's hard to judge, split hairs to judge the difference between this player and that player. However, with that said, if there's a specific player that you really want, and if you notice, most of the times when Howie Roseman makes the move, it's a player that has dropped for some reason. And Howie Roseman will say, you know what, we see that, but we want to take that player anyway. And perhaps the best example of this was Jalen Carter, who
Mhm.
many folks a couple years ago in the draft ranked him number one. Okay, but he was involved in some things. There was a uh, driving incident, accident, issues that were going on. So there was some questions about character going on there. Howie Roseman and the Eagles staff decided, you know what? If he maybe that's not worth a number one pick, but where we're picking at number 10, if he drops down to us, it's worth that risk. And it got closer and closer. And when it got close, he jumped up just to number 9 from 10 to 9 to get the guy that he wanted. Okay. Now, a few years later, there are zero regrets except from those other 9 teams who did not take uh, Jalen Carter. The same thing happened. Jihad Campbell, the linebacker who they took this year, they had their fingers crossed. They were hoping against hope that he would drop all the way to them at what, 32, and he started to drop. And at that point, they said, you know what? In our mind, he's a top half of the first round pick. They were looking to move up to like 20, 21, 22. If they could have, they would have made that trade to get him. They thought he was a value at that. Long way of saying they will go up when it makes sense in the draft to do it. And it's not too great a sacrifice in draft capital. But the strategy there is to accumulate many draft picks as possible. So when the right time comes, you make the move. I think this is just a case of Howie Roseman being smarter than a lot of the other guys in the NFL, Sean.
I completely agree with that. And there's a couple instances that I can think of. And when it works, yeah, it's great to go trade capital. The Kansas City Chiefs traded up, gave a decent amount of their future up to get Patrick Mahomes. Oh boy, that ended up working out pretty well. Now, Chicago Bears, a team that I've been a fan of. I've seen this go wrong many times. Traded up to get Mitchell Trubisky, did not work. Traded up to get Justin Fields, did not work. Looking back at it, yeah, you'd rather they have just kept their picks, got a different guy at a different position who could have ended up being a franchise cornerstone for them. So it definitely goes both ways. When it works, it's the best thing in the world. When it doesn't, you're sitting there scratching your head on why did we do this? So it's pretty funny. And actually, this transition right here, talk about a coach who did not like trading up and would actually consistently trade back. We're going to talk about Bill Belichick, but not because of how he coached the New England Patriots and how he handled draft day, but because he is now in the news for all sorts of different reasons that I never thought we'd be talking about Bill Belichick in this manner. Jim, we could go a number of different directions. 24-year-old girlfriend, a new media tour, which I never thought Bill Belichick would go on. We have a very different Bill Belichick right now. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, first of all, Sean, I'm an old man. Okay. Not quite as old as Bill Belichick, but I'm getting there. And I can't imagine having a 24-year-old girlfriend. Okay. Now, you're in your 20s, you're an adult, but the life experiences are much different for someone in their 20s, someone who's 70 some years old, like Bill Belichick. And you know what? Hey, it's his private life, his personal life. God love him. He could do whatever he likes if this is what he wants. But I think those of us from the outside observing this said, this probably is not going to end well. Okay. And sure enough, we're now seeing some of the repercussions because he's not just, um, I was ready to use the expression getting in bed with. I should probably go a little different angle. But it's not just dating this young woman. He has made her part of his business also. She's in charge of the PR, and this turned of Bill Belichick Enterprises. Next thing you know, he's doing this interview for his new book that's coming out. And as you mentioned it, here's the guy who's so nasty in his press conferences, always belligerent, always made it tough on the media. Now that he has a book out, he's turning to the media and wants them to treat him nicely when he's been so nasty for so many years, intentionally so. And then when he has his girlfriend speak up in the interview, telling the interviewer, no, you can't ask about how we met or these other things. Well, Bell Belichick came on later with a press release saying, "Oh, the agreement was we were just going to talk about the book, none of these other things." You know what? No, no one would say we are not going to talk about any of this other stuff. That's not how it works. Bill, that's the only reason why people will read your book and listen to this interview. Of course, we're going to ask you about it. You should know that. You should be prepared with answers, and you can make this thing much better. But no, you didn't. You and your girlfriend chose to make this as difficult as possible. And now every news report we're getting, she's interfering with things at his coaching job at North Carolina. She all of a sudden has a major real estate portfolio worth millions of dollars, which all came about after a dating Bill, which again, it's his right to do what he wants with his money, but it's not a good look for him. And Sean, I just can't see any way that this is going to end well.
I don't either. And I mean, let's be honest, it's a weird situation. It's weird at the end of the day. And not that I don't know how the right way to handle a situation like that is, but I sure do know that, they are not handling it properly. The interview just tanked a lot of things. And as you said, respectfully, we don't care about the book. This is not about the book. Like, yeah, he was a great coach, but he wasn't an exciting guy. And you know, what's his book gonna entertain us with? It's yeah, I'm beyond me on understanding that. And this whole situation is just the media tour, and she's clearly pulling the strings on how he's acting now. It's not the Bill Belichick we knew throughout his whole coaching career, and it's going to be very interesting to see how all this translates to North Carolina. I mean, he's there to do a job, and right now it seems like that's kind of on the back burner of importance right now, which I'm sure is not what North Carolina wanted when they went out and sought after him, and is not what probably some of these NFL teams who still thought they might be able to get him back into the NFL were looking for. So it's a new chapter of Bill Belichick. It's a strange and interesting one. And as you said, it's his personal life. It doesn't matter what I think about it. It's not my life there, but it's just not normal. I would say it's against a lot of social norms right now, and it is what it is. It's his life, and he's living it, and we'll follow along for the story, I guess.
And yes, we will. It is not social norm. And just the last thought, a guy who is so prepared on the football field, you would think he would have been prepared for this in the interview. And he could have handled it gracefully. He could have, hey, interesting story. I never imagined this would happen, but we got thrown together on a plane. We chatted. We found we had mutual interests. She's charming and wonderful. And yes, I know it's against social norms at my age, but sparks flew. But whatever. He could have painted a much better picture and got and listeners and followers of his to support him a bit. All right, let's move on. Let's move to baseball. A real interesting topic came up this week, Sean. Another interview. This one, David Sampson. He was previously the general manager of the Miami Marlins, and he's actually turned out to be a pretty interesting guy with his interviews, coming out with intriguing thoughts on the game itself. And he brought something up that it really struck me, Sean. He advocated for a neutral site, warm weather World Series, similar to what we see with the Super Bowl. And he was advocating for that. I know you're an LA guy, so beautiful weather all the time. I'm sure LA would be in the rotation, Sean. But what did you think of his idea?
Super interesting, and I can see the, the positives to it, but my answer is please do not let this happen. I don't think that this should be happening. It makes sense for the Super Bowl. It's one game, and that's just how the NFL standards has been. But when we look at hockey, basketball, baseball, 7-game series, when you get to that level, you should have your home field, your home court, your home ice to go back to. And I think it's coming at a funny time when we just saw LA and New York in the World Series. I think the MLB got their dream with that World Series. I think they would have liked the Yankees to play a little better in it, but that was the location that you wanted from a media standpoint and a business standpoint for the MLB. So do I think if we had a neutral site and his plan was, 7 games in 7 days if it were to go to game 7 and it's one big party in whatever city you choose. Yeah, that's cool. You got great media coverage. You give people the chance to prepare if they want to go to the World Series, just like, people have already planned their Super Bowl trips for the next couple of years, knowing where the location is. It makes sense, but it's against what I think, baseball tradition is. And you work so hard to have that home field advantage in the World Series to see it just get thrown out. And I get it. Yeah, you get to bat last in majority of the games if you get there. I get the plan where you kind of compensate for it, but I'm really against it. I think it's awesome for home fans to be able to cheer on their home team, just like in the NBA Finals, which we're going to see in a couple weeks. That home court means a lot to that fan base, and not just for home court advantage, but you have cities who are dreaming of being able to host a World Series one day. So, let's say a team like the Miami Marlins, who I don't know if I don't know the history, but I don't know how many times they've been to a World Series, but you got to think that if they get there twice, so if they get there now after all the years throughout my life where I haven't seen very good Marlins baseball, that's going to mean a lot to the city and they're going to come and support. And I think they'd much rather see them on their home field than, oh, let me go fly to Vegas all the way across the country because that's who's hosting it the year we finally get to make it. So I'm very against it. I get the pros to it, but I don't think it should change. And I think that the home field means so much to fans, to players to play in front of their home crowd. I don't want to touch that and mess up that system.
You know what, Sean? I think I'm going to surprise you here. I'm the old guy. I'm the one who should be talking about tradition. I'm the guy who, for the last 2 years, talked about the college football playoffs should should be at a home field as much as possible. Penn State played SMU in a home playoff game when it was cold, very cold. But you know what? The fans showed up. It was a home playoff game, and I get that. However, however, there's a difference. You mentioned like the NBA, the NHL, 7-game series, get the home court, home ice advantage. Yeah, but those are indoors. Okay. Baseball's the summer sport. And you mentioned LA, New York, Yankees and Dodgers in the last World Series. And that's great. Two media centers, rabid fans, all of that. The problem is, okay, how about next year, Sean, when it's, how about Cleveland versus Cincinnati? Okay. And the weather's crappy. Now, remember also, they've been expanding the playoffs for years. So there'll be home playoff games and plenty. If you make the World Series, you will have plenty of home games in the playoffs before you get to the World Series. Now, how about as you get further and further into the season, we have World Series now that reach the month of November. Do you want to spend November in Minnesota outside, Sean, watching the Twins play your favorite team play your Dodgers? I don't think so. By moving it to a neutral field, southern, in the South, in LA, in Dallas, in Miami, in Tampa, if Tampa ever built a stadium, you would then have, yes, able to schedule your plans to go to the World Series. I do think it would be important to reserve blocks of tickets for the home teams. If it's, say, a 50,000 seat stadium, maybe 15,000 seats per game are reserved for the hometown fans, okay? And the thought he also mentioned, you would have the possibility of playing 7 days in a row instead of having multiple days off. Where that might be important, and this may be a little bit subtle, is baseball's a marathon, 162 game season. It's based on having, say, a 5-man pitching rotation. That the better team over time will have 5 good pitchers, or my team will have better pitching than your team for my team to do better. Well, that becomes null and void in a World Series where there's too many various off days for travel. You may need 2 or even 3 pitchers, and that's it. It's not really the same test. It's not the same test of the starting pitchers. It's not the same test of the bullpens. Candidly, and the other thing, PR for the game itself. We saw this. We were talking about NFL draft when they went out to Green Bay and went over several days. It becomes a party, an event, in ways that a 7 game series bouncing back and forth between two cities just doesn't work that way. I'm actually would be excited about it, Sean. I don't think we're going to see it, but I would love to.
I do like the points that you brought up there, and I do agree. I don't think we're actually going to see it happen. I think that would be a pretty drastic change. The one last point to be pro home field for the World Series is thinking about when you said, let's say that Dodgers make the World Series. World Series is in Miami this year. From someone from LA. Now, if I wanted to go to a game, all of a sudden that expense becomes drastically more for me to fly across the country and you know let's see, Dodgers Sunday through Monday, right? Type of game. Finding that time off of work, stuff like that for all these fans becomes more difficult than saying, oh, you know what? Okay, I know I got a 7 p.m. first pitch tonight. I can leave work a little early to get to that game. So I do think as it makes it easier for fans, some fans, I guess, to get to a game, it can also make it more difficult for fans who, instead of just taking that drive to your stadium, now got to fly, across the country potentially to get to a World Series game. So interesting thoughts. We'll see if that story develops anymore. And then moving on to our last subject of the day, we're heading back to college and college football. Reports have come out, Jim, that Texas has a $40 million payroll for this upcoming season. There's a lot of implications and ways to dive into this. What do other programs do? What does it mean for I know the article that we had taken a look at Ohio State, Penn State, and some of these other programs. And also, I want to ask you, does a $40 million payroll matter that much? Does that truly mean that Texas is significantly better than any other team in the country?
No, an emphatic no. They're very good, okay? And they're going to have Arch Manning as their quarterback. And one of the things, Sean, as we've dealt with this NIL world where college football players are getting paid, one of the things we've learned is the numbers get manipulated a bit. It's hard to really define the exact numbers. But in general, that $40 million from Texas, let's break this down a little bit. First of all, what's going to happen this season, different than prior years, is the schools themselves are going to be able to put out $20 million for student athletes. Of those $20 million, the vast majority of that money is going to go to football players, okay? So that's new money. In the past couple of years, just with NIL, we've been reaching like $20 million payrolls for teams. So you add an additional, say, 17 million that can be compensated directly. You know what? That $40 million is not that crazy. It really isn't. Okay. And remember, in the NFL, you got one player, you got a quarterback making that alone. All right. But the Texases, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, they're going to be giving out the $20 million directly. Plus, there's going to be additional NIL money over and above that 20 million that we're going to see, Sean. So is it a crazy number? No. Does it make Texas the absolute favorite? I think by coincidence, Texas is considered one of the favorites this season, but I don't think it's because of this. Oh, they're going to be spending 40 million, so much more than everybody else. When all's said and done, I'm thinking these other schools are going to be paying close to that amount also, Sean.
I completely agree. I think it's an eye-popping number off the page, but when you break it down like you just did, it's not necessarily a huge increase in what we've already seen from some of these schools. And I also agree. At the end of the day, you still got to go out and play football games and win football games. It's just like we talked about with March Madness. Does it change everything that now NIL is only going to be the reason a team wins? No. You still have to win games at the end of the day. You still have to be well coached. You still have to play well. We've seen historically from NFL to NBA to MLB, sometimes the teams with the highest payroll are a complete bust. And you've seen some of this too with the Mets. They put a ton of money into their pitching staff. DeGrom, Scherzer, they're no longer even on the team anymore because it just wasn't smart money. So, not saying that's what Texas is this year, but there's a lot more that goes into it than how much NIL money you're paying out.
Plus, one other factor with Texas, Sean, I wonder how much of that's going to Arch Manning, the
A
quarterback.
whole lot.
I would guess the same thing. All right, Sean, that is going to be it for this week's show. Thank you so much, Sean, and thank all of you for watching. Make sure you join us again next week on Shauns Take.
Keystone Sports Network.